Hey, welcome back to another VR video. Today, we got something special here. With some asterisks though, but this is the PImax Crystal Super's micro OLED optical engine. Until now, there have only been the QLED variants available, and I have the 50 ppd inside my headset right now. But with this, we can instead get OLED screens for those contrast ratio snobs. But before I get into any of that, I do have to make several important disclaimers, as I normally would not make this kind of video, but there is a very specific reason I still am. Firstly, PImax did send the engine for free, but they actually didn't require me to make a video on it. Said I could if I wanted to, but with no real guidelines or restrictions. They mainly wanted some feedback, as I was pretty negative on their pancake lenses in general when I tested it during their roadshow in San Jose. And if you know me, I am a bit of a pancake lens hater. And I also think OLED's fine and cool, but I think it's also kind of overrated. Comments are probably getting ready to skin me alive for this. And despite this, they still wanted some thoughts from me. I kind of gotta respect the confidence, really. Secondly, this is not a final product and is missing some key features. Namely, there is no eye tracking, I am limited to 72 Hz, and instead of the claimed 116 horizontal in the advertising, this one only goes up to 108 right now. And because of that, I did question if I even wanted to make a video, honestly. But this brings me to point number 3 and why I'm doing this. I wrote up a first impressions on the Super Micro OLED module after the roadshow in San Jose, where I was profoundly negative on it. It was actually one of the worst first impressions I had of a headset, and that was like with barely 30 minutes to use it. This, though, not final. It has made a key change of bringing the lenses closer to the eyes and is slightly closer to final hardware, which that made such a huge improvement to the experience. So because of that, and I don't know when I'll get to do a final one that's in depth, because I'm probably only going to do one video on this instead of milk 15 out of it. I'd like to correct the records now, since I'm more optimistic about this in the Dream Air, and I am one of the few who is in a fortunate position to have this, and people seem really curious about this module. I'd also like this video to serve as a bit of a record in case things do go south later. The Super Micro OLED may justify the swappable engine gimmick here. God, I really do hope that statement doesn't age poorly by the full release and I end up ranting on broken promises again. We'll talk about some potential worries near the end though, don't you worry. But I do just say don't buy this based on just the video right now with how much is missing, please. This said, I'm mostly going to be focusing on the module itself here, since stuff like the tracking, it's the same from prior videos, and I'll save fully covering things like the software again for my mega review, as PImax has made quite a few improvements, and I expect even more coming since my last in-depth analysis. So, I'll let that out of the way, let's get to these first impressions. As I've had the micro OLED for about several days now, and I've gotten to do a good amount of testing, but there's also too much missing for me to call it a full review, so I'm not going to go as in-depth as I usually do on everything. Still need to do some more testing on stuff as well. But we are going to talk about the optics here quite a lot, because I don't think a whole lot is going to change there. So let's knock the sections that'll be quick out of the way, starting with FoV, because, you know, that's always a big thing for me. These are the rendered numbers. The values are the theoretical max, because they're all the headset renders to applications. Measuring tools make it a little bigger than the rendered. It's all right, given we're using a very, very tiny panels. But this FoV is still on the smaller side. The horizontal is actually pretty average on the level of the Quest 3, but that vertical is kind of rough and it feels below average, even if you are getting all of it like me. That brings me to my subjective WIM FOV results, as I have a good face shape for VR. So we have 90 vertical, 110 horizontal, 94 overlap, same thing. It's all right for what it is. Not going to dwell on this much since it's not the final product or target. I'm also only going to briefly touch on performance, since again, not final, but 100% right now is 5080 by 4088 per eye, almost 20 million pixels. This is really nice on a 5090 at least. It can drive that in pretty much everything I throw at it, short of the absolute most demanding stuff. And even some of those I can manage reasonably well, because I'm targeting 72 Hz right now instead of 90. It's actually pretty nice to have something performance with high visual quality. If PImax actually does have multiple profiles, and this is one of them, some people may love this just for that aspect. I'll look at this more in depth another day once I get 90 Hz or the final distortion profile. Moving on. So let's talk about the comfort now. Well, the idea of 1.3-inch screens in this huge form factor is pretty comical. Given those and these lenses are not gigantic slabs of glass, the module itself is a good bit lighter than the QLED variants. Here it is versus the 50 PPD, and yeah, that's a notable weight difference. I've been playing around a little bit, both stock and with all the mods I have on. It's an improvement with both of them, I'd say. That lower weight means there's less inertia with movements, even with this form factor, and the general balance on my head is better. But I'm also not talking about this from a sim racing perspective, because I'm not a simmer. I play more active stuff, such as like Pavlov, where all the moving around with my head certainly adds up. And this headset rests so incredibly well on my head and feels like a nice helmet. The longest session I've had time for right now with the micro OLED is about 2 hours or so. Not a true marathon session, but a decent length. And yeah, I did feel the general comfort improvement there. My 50 PPD module is still comfy with all the mods I have on it, and it's not a world-changing difference there, but from some testing I've done with stock, which I do need to do more of, the improvement is even more noteworthy there than with mods, and I think those who do extremely long sessions are gonna appreciate the weight difference here, especially if they don't want to spend like $100 in further comfort mods. This isn't some big screen Beyond or Megane X that's like sub 200 grams, but raw weight isn't everything, and I actually do like the hard strap here that the Crystal Super has, since I find it helps balance everything. And again, I'm not somebody who plays for hours and hours, but I actually do want to try something like a 5-6 hour marathon session for my full review to stress test the micro OLED. I actually don't feel skeptical of managing that with the module. Whereas with the 50 PPD here, doing that seated is fine. I have done it before actually, but in a more active game, the thought of going for over 5 hours, it makes me a little bit nervous. I also noticed that thermally, this headset feels a little better than the 50 PPD, but that might partially because I'm only running 72 versus 90 hertz, so less heat's generated. And there is no issue with feeling cross-eyeballed taking the headset off, unlike the Roadshow I tried, where that was terrible and I had double vision for about 20 minutes afterwards. And speaking of hertz, let's get to the real star of the show, the screens and these lenses. Yes, it's not final, but I don't expect too much to change here, so I'm going to go into a little bit more depth than I did for the other sections. This has two panels that are 3840 by 3552 micro OLED, which means that every pixel is self-emissive and thus can be freely adjusted for incredible control over the image. Contrast a headset like the Quest 3, where you only have the whole backlight, and then you got the 50 PPD here, which uses local dimming to allow some zones of pixels to be adjusted. One notable benefit of OLED is faster pixel response times when it comes to things like gray to gray, though on something like turning from completely off, it's not always an auto win. But combine these two together, it's a little weird in some places, at least at 72 hertz. On the positives, because of that and there's no big backlight, 72 hertz mode with the micro OLED is surprisingly usable here compared to LCD. Even if I ended up dropping frames when I was seriously stress testing this, while I do still notice when that occurs, it doesn't really hit as bad as LCD, provided it's not something extremely bad. If I'm still down in the 30s and the 40s on FPS, it's not a great time. But some dips into the 50s or 60s, it really isn't so bad, and 72 hertz mode itself is pretty usable. Whereas I would really try to avoid that as much as I could on LCD. Do I agree with the idea that it's equal to 90 hertz though on that? I wouldn't really say that, and I do feel like the sentiment is a little exaggerated if you're able to maintain proper frame times at least. If we really want to split hairs, there's some room to talk about physically having more information because more frames can help in some situations, but this isn't the video to go in depth on that. I still really want to try 90 hertz mode, but I can actually live with 72 hertz mode, and it's a notable improvement versus running the same FPS on LCD. Whereas I don't really even want to think about running the backlight below 90 hertz. I haven't tried PImax's motion smoothing yet to see if it's any better on OLED versus LCD. I want to have 90 hertz before trying that to give it a fair shot. However, this said, running at lower hertz means that each frame is displayed for a longer time, and to simplify things with how VR black frame insertion is and duty cycles, essentially the persistence gets worse. having high persistence leads to things like a smeary image. You could kind of compare it to motion blur or ghosting if you don't have a good frame of reference for high persistence HMDs, such as the PSVR 2. In cases like that, the headset can sometimes feel smooth, but it's smeary. But this said, the persistence is nowhere near bad here as some of the worst examples on the market, like that PSVR 2. Given this is micro OLED, where I do hear persistence tends to be a bit of a problem, and I saw it personally on the Apple Vision Pro, I'd say it's okay at 72 hertz, but I do see it to an extent. I'm willing to cut some slack and hope 90 hertz is better, since this is already nothing compared to the worst examples. If you are super sensitive to this issue though, you might be a little bothered by it, but if it improves at least a little whenever we get 90 hertz, I think this is gonna be pretty fine. I can probably live with it now at least. In a similar vein as something like the brightness you run on panel can affect the persistence, when it comes to brightness, it's okay. I'd probably peg it around average-ish brightness, neither horrid nor exceptional. Something like the Quest 3-ish, give or take a little bit. If you're coming from most headsets nowadays, I actually think you'll be pretty fine with this. It may even be a little bit better than some of the dimmer pancake optics out there. If you're coming from something like the PImax Crystal line, super or normal though, or the PSVR 2, if the high persistence there did not make you miserable, I think you're going to be underwhelmed by the brightness here. I'm going to take some measurements with my Lux meter for my full review once I get some more time. Speaking of brightness and contrast though, let's talk Mira, black levels, and glare. I do not see any Mira on this headset. It is a damn clean image. Conversely, I get minimal but still present Mira on my QLED modules here, which definitely does hit some brighter scenes like a clear blue sky. Conversely, on the micro OLED, even in areas which should be really bright, like say that vibrant blue sky, and it's not as impressive from the raw brightness, the total lack of Mira can definitely make up for this somewhat. As particularly if you are somebody who is really sensitive to it, or if you just got a bad unit because of panel variance. Even with little details, the image is just clean in a way that the 50 ppd module has trouble matching in the worst cases for the Mira. It's the little subtle imperfections like that you don't even always consciously note, which can detract from one of the major selling points of VR, getting you immersed in the content. But on glare and black levels, it's generally really good. Not even my biggest issue with the headset, surprisingly. However, glare is still a fact of life, even if this controls it a lot better than I expected with my experience in pancakes. The micro OLED is insanely sensitive when it comes to anything but raw sharpness for the sweet spot. One of the smallest I've seen, I think, and that's true with how it affects the glare and internal reflections, among other things. How the glare generally works here is it seems to like it manifests as it's pushing more towards the peripheral and kind of surrounding your vision, sort of like a very faint circle. But I also think that PImax might be diffusing the glare across the lens to an extent, or at least it seems to do that in some cases. It's a little weird. As an example, in Space Engine, if I look around at the numerous stars in intergalactic space like this, it's near perfect pitch black around most of them with near non-existent glare. It's really impressive. It doesn't also look crushed inside the HMD as YouTube is probably making this scene look. But if I open the menu like this, it's a very bright element which takes up a sizable amount of my view, and I immediately see the black levels raise everywhere because of the glare. They raise and lower in time with the menu opening and closing. Once you see it, you can't unsee it. I think these lenses just struggle with super bright elements that are perpetually there in very high contrast situations, but if being fair, pancake lenses kind of in general struggle with this, because for another example in Space Engine, when I was looking at the stars, I found some which were weirdly kind of pulsing. These stars rapidly dimmed and brightened themselves, never fully turning off. And that felt like a near constant flashbang. It were as if a thin gray film was appearing over the entire lens and rapidly flickering in time with the flickering stars. Here is a simulation of it on screen right now. In this instance, I found the QLED Super a far better experience, even if not quite hitting the same black levels as the micro OLED, and I found that kind of unusable. Despite this being space and star fields, which is an environment that local dimming famously tends to handle very badly. But somehow the Super does it extremely well. I played around with some more environments in the game, and most really weren't remotely this bad. It was only the one time that I didn't even want to play the game anymore. And kind of weirdly, when I came back to here to try and get some footage, I couldn't find the exact spot again or replicate the issue. The stars weren't behaving the same, and all I have is this brief still image of through the lens when I first reported it to PImax. But this at least bothered me so much, I worry about finding more scenes like this. But to illustrate my point about static objects, I actually went to the Edge in VR chat to test this, and I was kind of stunned by how good the internal reflections were there. Not entirely invisible, but they were pretty great for a good chunk of the light show. This world is usually a pretty stellar stress test for glare and internal reflections due to the high contrast nature and many rapid flashing moving lights. I don't know if it's the fact there's more bright light sources here or if they're moving a lot more, but it's how it was handled, and it handled it pretty damn well, even as somebody who hates pancake lens glare a lot. In some higher contrast scenes as well, you can see a highly localized form of internal reflection, like a super faint double image. For example, if I have FPS VR in a pure black background, it's like there is a second ghost image of it nearby. This tends to be incredibly minor most of the time and not much of an issue during normal usage. Like, I've only seen it a few times if we discount loading environments like this, and I think it's a little more subtle than the Quest 3 maybe on this aspect. I honestly almost feel like I'm nitpicking bringing it up, but it was still there a few times, so I'm going to mention it. Personally, I'm somebody who prefer like a generally low level issue across most of the image rather than an incredibly distracting but small one that goes from perfect to terrible. A little more on that later. So slightly raised black levels aren't really the worst, and I actually like how PImax has handled it instead of ultra localized glare most of the time. And there are definitely still plenty of times where you do get the full deep blacks with minor glare, so it's not like they're raised 24/7. And they're still pretty good even when this happens. Again, I need to do a lot more testing here, and I do eventually want to do some direct side-by-sides with my 5090 desktop and laptop before going too in-depth, but at least in my initial impressions, checking things that I've gone through a million times and doing them on the micro OLED, I'd say that this will have higher peaks with contrast, but also lower valleys than something like the QLED Super, which is kind of a little bit more consistent experience even if it doesn't reach the same highs. Now make no mistake, this is still generally better on contrast if that matters greatly to you. But I still don't think it's as wild a gap as some people who are OLED or DeS say, given some of the glare. If anyone does say glare is not an issue on this, though, they're wrong, or they are only testing in the best case scenarios, because I will admit that in less extreme contrast scenarios, yeah, I could maybe see how somebody may say it's better than the Quest 3, or they don't see it, and in those less contrasty scenes, there can be borderline no glare. And I think it really is quite impressive. But again, it's just sort of a fact of life with the physics of pancake lenses. Edge-to-edge clarity might also be the best, but also worst thing about this. When talking pure sharpness, the edge-to-edge clarity on this it's just massive. I'd say it manages to be in the ballpark of, but not quite at, the Quest 3, considering this has a similar, if smaller, FoV. It's not the entire view, but I can very easily read over almost the whole FoV. And couple this with the better sharpness, after this video I'm probably going to be primarily using this for these in front of the camera segments and reading my script, since it's just easier. This aspect also is not really affected by your eye position or IPD much. But the same on this thing can't be said for the next problem. And this is something which I really hope eye tracking and auto IPD can help. Those could make this potentially much less of an issue, because it's easily my biggest one with the headset at this unfinished stage. So let's talk about colors. The colors are pretty great and natural. They're not highly saturated, but have a little more realistic hue to them, which I like, as sometimes OLED is set up to be oversaturated. These panels do have the ability to support 10-bit color depth, but unless the application specifically calls for 10-bit depth, it's just going to render an 8-bit like everything else. And for ages, VR has just been in 8-bit the vast majority of the time. Been playing around with some VR native games, some mods, some flat screen games, and Most aren't really too much of a difference versus the 8-bit QLED, honestly, but there's some where it feels like there is a larger difference. I really got to see about if those programs which can force 10-bit work in VR sometime. But there is one thing which does seriously put a damper on the colors at times. Orange color shifting and vignetting. So you see, when you look dead center, the color and image is great, but these lenses are extremely prone to, when you look anywhere else, starting to shift towards a very strong orange hue. As if somebody turned on the night filter in Windows, which really stands out with how good the center is, and the issue is completely gone then. When I first tried this at 68mm, my usual IPD, I start checking most things. The orange color shifting was horrible. I thought pancake lens glare was the most distracting thing for me in VR. Literally looking anywhere but dead center caused this effect, and it was so bad that it was honestly a deal breaker for me, and I was ready to hate this. But on the recommendation from a PImax rep, I played around with my IPD a bit, experimented between 66 and 70mm. Most headsets I use generally work best with 67 to 70, and at around 69mm, only one bigger, it was a lot better. Like, a lot. Now, it is still a highly present problem, and I think it is the weakest point of the visuals, but this took the issue from, oh dear God, get this off me, to, I really don't like it, but it could be a lot worse. And at the edges, though, it's still bad. But I can slightly look around with my eyes, and it's only very minorly present then. When it comes to orange color shift, this thing may very well have one of the most sensitive sweet spots I have ever seen. I still needed to further experiment and see if I can improve it. Try some fractional numbers, since I only tried whole number IPD. But even being 1mm different had some notable effect on this, positive or negative. It is also incredibly sensitive to eye distance as well. Get your face closer to the lenses, the better. Sweeviver, a PImax rep, told me when I was at the roadshow in San Jose that this is just kind of an issue with micro OLED, but I think it's kind of the lenses too, as I'd noticed this sort of shift on the Quest 3, which is LCD. Granted, it's like 5 times better there. How bad this is also depends a lot on the environment. In bright, colorful areas, such as a sunny day in Skyrim VR, when looking up, it stands out a lot more. Conversely, if I am playing in more dark environments that are more muted, the problem is far less distracting, even if present. I do still notice the vignetting and screen dimming on the edges, however. But in those true best case scenarios, such as Project Wingman's King's mission, which is already tinted incredibly orange, being set at sunset over a flaming city, while also being so orange it was a meme in the fandom. Despite how much I just complained, the problem is practically invisible, total non-issue, and this is the best the game has ever looked to me, and I benchmarked this mission for my test suite when I test headsets on this. There's still a little dark vignetting at the edges though, but it was really nice to not have that problem. In more rapid head movements left and right though, like that, it does stand out a lot more, and it still greatly bothers me. Even in some of those best case scenarios, the darkening at the lens edges is just kind of, it's okay at best. But I also thought that sucked on the Quest 3 too, and a lot of people seem fine with that, so probably just more controversial takes from Omni here. But there's one issue here, and it's something I have concerns over, given PImax is going for a larger FoV. There are some minor distortions on this, and this is also something that was heavily affected by IPD. They're mostly at the far peripheral, and I don't see them often, but there are just some environments they get annoying. Combine this with the vignetting and the orange color shift, I don't really like looking at the far peripheral too much in this headset. Now, I see stuff like this in the Quest 3 too, and if you can't tell by this point, I'm not the biggest fan of pancake lenses, but it is better there. I don't think it'll bother people too much, but if you're sensitive to distortions, you might have some issues with these. And while it is mostly at a manageable level now, I do worry if it's going to get worse, since PImax is trying to add more FoV. Okay, let's talk some conclusions about the micro OLED here. This is not a final product, so take these with some grains of salt, but even at this point, there are some good points here. Some great points even, but also some that have real potential pitfalls to watch for if anyone's going to continue following the news for this to the final release. Certain things I don't anticipate changing too much though, namely the lenses and comfort. The latter of which, it's actually pretty good. I need to try True Marathon, but I think people who play super active games for long periods, they're going to appreciate the difference by the micro OLED versus the other modules or heavy headsets in general. The raw clarity and sharpness is incredible. It is an amazing image, which when looking dead center, it's among the best pictures I've seen in VR. However, orange color shifting is a notable weakness of these lenses and is so sensitive to the right placement. I could see some people are going to have some real big problems from how bad it is if you are even a single millimeter off. PImax really needs that auto IPD to work properly here to minimize it. There's also some very slight distortions, which they're mostly okay now, unless it's your primary pain point in VR. But if they get worse for the sake of more FoV, it's going to be rough, and that's probably my biggest concern right now. I do want more FoV, it is a big thing for me, but that has potential to ruin the experience, especially because these distortions are just as sensitive to your eye placement as the color shift is. On the plus side, these lenses do control glare and internal reflections profoundly well. Really amazed by that, and that helps the micro OLED screen shine more. Initial thoughts, though, are these lenses aren't quite up to the Quest 3 overall. Some aspects that can get close, even if we set aside the fact the sweet spot on that is completely gigantic and orders of magnitude better than anything in the industry, and we only compare these when they are perfectly dialed in. But specifically on glare and vignetting, I dare say it's possible they might be able to surpass the Quest 3 at times. Not all the time, sometimes, which is still a feat considering the contrast ratio on this is like 1,000,000 times better than the Quest. But there are those worst cases where it definitely blunts the OLED a bit. I can see why some people would say it feels like there's little or no glare in certain environments, but make no mistake, it is still a mostly minor thing here. I need to do a lot more thorough testing on this and some further direct side-by-sides. But in the meantime, I'm mostly pleasantly surprised by these lenses. But I think that also depends a little bit on if the orange shift is more a panel thing, like I was told, or if it's the lenses, which I still think it is, since I see it on the LCD Quest 3, or if it's both. At this point, I do still prefer my QLED 50 PPD Super and aspheric lenses myself. I just feel like they deal with scenes overall more consistently, whereas current pancake optics, I kind of find them more scene dependent. But these are mostly pretty good pancakes I think people are going to like, and I remember I have some super unpopular opinions about pancake lenses and micro OLED. I'm ready to get flamed in the comments for saying this. And look, maybe bigger FoV plus 90 Hz may change my mind somewhat. There are a few things that, if PImax manages to nail what's to come, I could see myself reaching this for if PImax manages to nail them, despite everything I just said. That's a good sign for justifying the swappable module system. I really want to stress this next part though. Please don't buy this headset just because of this video. I know I was thorough, honestly a lot more than I planned, but there's too much missing here that could potentially jeopardize things down the line for me to strongly say, go buy it! PImax actually did give me affiliate links and some small discount codes, $15 to $25 off. And like, I do appreciate supporting the channel, but I'm not going to post them. I'm into personal responsibility, and it's your choice what you spend money on, and your priorities may be a lot different from mine. But even if optimistic, I'm just hesitant to endorse a product that's missing some very key aspects versus what's advertised right now. And a discount is nice, but $25 is not going to be what makes or breaks this purchase for you. I can't try 90 Hz, there's no eye tracking, and we're not hitting the advertised FoV yet. Even if I think this has potential, the idea of potential is always a dangerous game on non-final hardware, especially as, while I love the hardware and there's nothing else I buy right now, PImax's history encourages some really healthy caution before release. The usual link I do have down in the description before somebody yells at me is for the released and tested QLED modules. The 50 PPD, which I'm using right now, and you can also check other reviews on. It's a released product that we know plenty about. It's an entirely different page too. Just don't use it for the micro OLED module yet, and like, just don't listen solely to me when buying, because VR is very personal and everyone's tastes are different. Anyway, there are my, not remotely short first impressions of the micro OLED. Honestly, I probably let myself get a little carried away with discussing the lenses. Probably gonna have to restate a good chunk of that stuff for my full review. But how are you feeling about the headset? Did I say everything you were expecting to hear, or am I making you worried now? Is there anything that you'll want me to try testing out for the full review? It might be a while till then, so yeah, I've got plenty of time to make a list for things to do. Let me know in the comments down below. But if you made it to the end here of however long this is, thank you for sticking around till the end. Consider subscribing to see what I do next, but if not, thanks for staying to the end anyway, and maybe I'll see you again sometime in the recommendations. Later.